Let's go ahead and talk about sort of age appropriateness first, because that's key to this conversation. Not every kid is the same, and from infants to teenagers, there's going to be a huge range. So how do you sort of monitor age-appropriate exposure to the news?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I like how you said that, Lori, as far as that every kid is different. And I think that's important when we look at kind of any guideline as far as what age of kids should be exposed to what amount of news. I think a key piece is really to look at for your child, how are they responding to the news based off of kind of what they're hearing, maybe what they're watching. And I think that's a key thing for us as parents that we need to pay attention to, because there are going to be some teenagers who can watch the news and then maybe the way they kind of compartmentalize information, they're able to move on and they kind of let it be and they go on with their day. But there might be some other teenagers who rather when they watch the news, that kind of carry that with them throughout their day. So I think a really key piece is rather than looking at more kind of age guideline, but look at more kind of your child and then really paying attention to what is their emotional response, what is their behavior like after they're maybe having these conversations or watching the news.
Yeah. Are you looking for changes in their behavior that might be unrelated then as well, or that you might think are unrelated but really are tied to this?
Yes, you're exactly right. And I think that's the piece then where us as parents, we have a responsibility to start to ask some of those questions to maybe understand why that behavior might be happening. I think, sometimes with the news and so forth, we sometimes forget that maybe what they're taking away is something very different than what we as adults are taking away. And their worries or their concerns might be very different than ours. And so that's where it's important for us to be having conversations. And I always encourage parents that I think a lot of times when we hear responsibility, we think that we have to educate and we have to talk. And I think we can never discount enough that as a parent, one of the most important things that I can do is just listen and ask those open questions about what they think about that to better understand how they are taking in that information, interpreting that information, and again, better understanding maybe what their concerns are at this point.
Right. So let's talk about what some of those good questions can be to start a conversation if your child, and it's hard to limit exposure, even if you have a 4-year-old and you say some of this stuff is just not appropriate for a 4-year-old to see, but very often something may come up. So what kinds of questions should you lead with as a parent to start that good conversation?
Yeah, very good question. I think, again, just sometimes asking the open question is, what do you think when you hear all of that news? Just kind of trying to better understand some of the thoughts that they might be having. I think, again, evaluating maybe some of the feelings that they might be having. I think we can prompt some of those feelings at times by asking questions about, are you having any worries at all based off of what you just read or based off of what you just heard? Are you having any anger at all? I think if we can always start with more of the open-ended questions, but sometimes, again, for some kids, that's a little bit startling to them and they don't know how to answer. So then typically we get the answer of, I don't know. Right. So instead, if we sometimes prompt with maybe some of the feelings, I think also helping them to understand sometimes how we feel about that. So sometimes how we can prompt those questions is maybe by saying, when I'm watching this, I actually get a little scared. Do you ever get scared at all? Because I think that's the piece that our kids also need from us, is to know that we also sometimes are uncomfortable with this. We also sometimes might have some anxiety about this. And so it's important for them to understand that it's okay to share that emotion.
How much is too much? So if you're really frightened about the future of the planet, that can feel pretty devastating to a child who's not processing, this isn't going to happen tomorrow.
Absolutely. And I think with that, a big piece in that is helping kids to understand what can we control in this. Because I think that is also the piece for each of us sometimes when we watch the news and we hear some of these things. Sometimes it creates feelings of feeling like I have no control over this. And I think kind of challenging not only our kids, but also, again, how we can teach them is that, this is really overwhelming for me too, or this really kind of scares me, but something that we can do today to help our planet, or something that we can do today to help other citizens or help our society. What should we do today to try to find some control in this? Because that's also, I think, what's so overwhelming for kids sometimes.
So take some action as a family then. That's an opportunity to take action.
Absolutely. And I do think that is, the unique piece about this is there's a lot of different conversations and a lot of different things happening throughout our world right now, that a lot of this can be used as good teaching opportunities. Again, to talk to them about, in our family, this is what respect looks like. This in our family, these are what our values are. So it can open up sometimes a lot of conversations that might not happen if we don't expose them at all to some of the news.
Yeah, we are challenged as well to not, stereotype. So, for some children, and I remember when President Trump came to South Dakota, there were children at the rally that we talked to who were in love. He was a hero to them, and he was a wonderful man. And I can imagine how painful it is for those children right now to hear some of the things that are being said about the president during impeachment. On the other hand, there are, children who are being raised by families who have nothing but contempt and disrespect for this president. And if the result isn't what they want, they might feel disillusioned by an entire process. How important is it for parents to not say, this is evil, this is a bad guy, this is a good guy, whether it's about the president or any public servant or political leader?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it again brings up that question about helping our kids to understand kind of how we value and who we value and how we find that value, and then also how we respect and how we do show respect. I think it brings up a lot of what you say too. It creates a good conversation for all of us to not only challenge ourselves, but to challenge our children, that we're going to have differences of opinions at times, and you're going to meet people that maybe have different political views than you. That doesn't make them bad people. We can still respect those people. We can still love those people. It's just that sometimes we have differences of opinions, and that's okay. And I think that's the piece that our kids sometimes are really kind of missing in today's kind of environment in our society, is that we kind of see so many people feel like they have to be on one polar end or the other. And if they disagree, that person's bad. And I think those are conversations, again, that we as parents need to kind of continue to challenge our kids, is that you will meet people that think differently than you and believe differently of you and have different opinions, and that's okay. We can still love those people, but it's more about we might just agree to disagree at times.
What do you suggest when the stress is? We talked about taking action as a family. Are there actions that we can take as a family that would just lead to stress relief, would lead to sort of, coping and soothing, because parents maybe need that a little bit too?
Yeah, and I think some of that is just very much that self-care piece. And maybe for some of us, that self-care piece might be that I'm turning off the TV and I'm not going to listen to it tonight. Or for my family, I'm going to have self-care for my family and we're not going to listen to it tonight. I think for many of us, for social media and for our teenagers, we have to keep in mind that they probably aren't even getting it on the TV. They're getting it on their phones. And so talking to them about that it's good to set limits for myself, pay attention to how I'm feeling after I'm reading or watching something, and then doing some of those self-care things of even just distraction, or maybe the self-care piece is the distraction about going to do something good in our society.
All right. And everybody needs a little break. Maybe it's time for some family fun. What does that sort of tell kids? Let's talk about the things that you can tell your kids without telling them anything.
Yeah, exactly. I think by our actions, right? And I think, again, even them seeing us maybe set some of those limits in our life, or seeing when they're able to see us be able to have a conversation with somebody that maybe we disagree, but they see that it doesn't mean that we still don't continue to talk afterwards. I think for our kids, they're really looking for us to set the example, and I think that's the piece that all of us need to continue to challenge ourselves to do.
Right. We all have a lot of work to do, because the example that we're going to see in the coming days with impeachment is probably not going to be the best example of speaking to each other with respect. Just from what we've seen so far, that many of the leaders will use a lot of rhetoric and hyperbole to make their case in Congress.
Exactly, and I think those are, again, they're good learning opportunities, especially for some of the teenagers that some of us might be parents of, to have conversations about, how is that portrayed? How is that seen, right? Maybe why are they doing that? But again, challenging them to really understand, that in our family, this is how we communicate. These are kind of standards that we stand by, as far as, it might be things even of, we don't name call in our family, or we always listen to other people. And even if we don't agree with them, we still give them the respect that we listen to what they're saying, right? Those are things that I think we can use right now to help to educate our kids, which also will help them for success, because they're going to walk through this as adults at some point too.
What if some of the scary news feels very personal? So I'm thinking of something that might be happening here. There's a transgender legislation. If you were in a family with a transgender child, this could cause some very immediate fear that is not, you don't have an opportunity to say this is happening in Australia. It's very, very far away. Here's the globe. Here's how we can help. This feels deeply personal. So do you see, problems that are being, sort of exacerbated in real people's lives, especially in those teenage years?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the piece as parents that we also have to remember, that we don't have to do this alone. So sometimes if I'm seeing that maybe my teenager really is struggling more, and it could be kind of precipitated or maybe exacerbated by some of the conversations that are happening within legislature or happening within the federal government, I think those are times that, again, if we're seeing that it's affecting them, that offering them, I think we should go talk to somebody. And again, I think that's the piece that we really want to model for our kids, is that if I'm having questions, or if this is really kind of feeling like a personal attack against me, that those are things that we just don't push aside. Those are not things that we just try to avoid, but those are things that this is a good time for us to try to walk through them. And that might be that reaching out to a counselor or a therapist to be able to kind of help to navigate that conversation.
Yeah. Is there a time when kids need to know about the news? We talked about sort of not limiting ourselves to ages, but how young is too young to really understand some of these complicated things?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's even maybe not completely, I would say, our elementary ages, I think it's much more limited. I think even the middle schoolers probably, it's not to say that it's not okay that they're exposed to news. Again, I think it's maybe limiting how much of the news, right? And so when you bring up like the impeachment hearings, I think it's very wise for a middle schooler to know that it's occurring. But as far as them watching kind of every step of this testimony and so forth, I think those are the pieces that we can help to kind of set those limits. And just like you said in the beginning, also paying attention to each kid's going to respond to this individually. I know there's probably some middle schoolers out there who are very passionate about politics, and they want to be involved with this, and they want to hear it, and they want to learn from it. And I think that all those things are great. But then again, as parents, just really paying attention to what's their kind of emotional response from this, what questions are they asking afterwards. I think the other piece of that is the more that we can engage with them when they're exposing themselves, the better. Because if they're watching a lot of the news on their own, we don't really know what they heard. So then when they're asking questions, it's sometimes harder to answer those questions. And so I think that encouraging them that, if this is something that you want to be a part of and you want to hear it, then let's sit down and do this together.
Which all goes back to good parenting overall. Have a good relationship with your kid to begin with. Know where they're getting the information, and have that family dinner or that time that you gather to talk about things in general. So, and for those of us whose children are a little bit older, just a moment of reassurance, like we've all been through this. You'll get through it too. It's not easy, but you can do it. It's just part of being a mom or a dad or a grandma or grandpa.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Amber Reints, for being here with us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.